All right, we got about 20 folks here, so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks again for those of you who are repeat visitors for coming to this Team Science Skills series put on by the Georgia CTSA. We are very happy to have Marissa Shuffler here with us today. But before we get to our session, as always, I want to remind you that we have future workshops coming up. This year, we close out this skills series with Maritza from, she's in California. I forgot the university off the top of my head. But it's focusing on facilitating collaboration in interdisciplinary, that should say, teams. And really happy to have her presenting to all of you as well. But today we have Marissa Shuffler. Marissa is currently at Clemson. She's an associate professor. She's a stellar scholar in basically all things teams, focusing a lot on team dynamics with over 3.5 thousand or 3,500 citations. She's been funded for over like $11 million, I think, at this point, probably more now, from places like the Army Research Institute, NASA. She won the NSF career grant, one of, I think, only 2 IO psychologists to ever do that. Department of Homeland Security has funded her research, and a lot of what she's doing now is focused in the healthcare sector. On a personal note, Maritza is a good friend of mine, and I can't wait for her to tell you more about multiple team systems. So, Maritza, it's all you.
All right, let me get my slides up here. All right, now does that give you the right view?
Yeah, you're good.
Perfect, good, great. All right, over here. And thank you, Chris, for that introduction. I'm excited to share some hopefully some useful insights and talk to everyone a little bit today about something that is personally very important and of interest to me. I've been doing research on this concept of multi-team systems since probably for about a decade now, a little bit more. And so there have been some great advances in the field that have been made. And so I want to talk to you all today a little bit about what we know about multi-team systems. What are they? Why should you all be interested in them? And what are some of the recommendations we might be able to offer from that existing literature in terms of improving and enhancing the teaming that's happening in a range of different settings in these multi-team systems environments. So just a quick little overview of how things will be breaking down. I'm planning to talk a little bit about just, what do we need to think about multi-team systems and what it means to operate in one, be a part of one, some of the advantages and challenges of working in these types of systems, especially from the view of research multi-team systems, and what are some of the recommendations, as I said, kind of how do we improve and make these complex systems really work for us for research purposes, for scientific purposes, and beyond. And hopefully we'll leave a good amount of time at the end for any questions or feedback or additional thoughts that you all may have. All right, so as we get started, we'd love to see just, and also as a quick note, please feel free to add comments along in the chat if you have any questions. But just so I can get a quick sense of who else here today and kind of what you may be looking for or hoping to get out of the session. If you have a moment to add in your name, institution, what is your area of research or expertise, and what are the things that you might be hoping to get out of the session, that would be great. So just give everybody a quick second to do that. You have folks here. All right, some different backgrounds, specialties. Okay. Great. Yes, absolutely. Go Tigers. All right. Well, feel free to keep on going, and I'm going to go ahead and jump right on in. See here. Okay, so of course the easiest way, or kind of the best way I think to start is really just, let's jump right into thinking about why is this important? Why do we want to even consider this concept of what we call a multi-team system? Well, part of it is because working across different teams, working within teams, all of these can be very, very difficult things to accomplish effectively. I know that you're all here on this team science skills series to be able to learn different aspects about teamwork and teaming and in lots of different settings. And I think that one thing that is especially unique when we start to talk about not just a single team, but multiple teams working together are the added complexities that come into play, but also the realization that probably a lot of the projects that you're working on right now, a lot of the efforts that you're taking part of really are not just teams, they're multi-team systems. And I always like to use this as a great example of how even when we're working with experts, when we are experts, it can still be very difficult to effectively work together, especially when we're working in these more complex environments. So if you are not familiar at all with the Mars Climate Orbiter, it was a mishap that happened in the 90s where essentially $500 million worth of very valuable equipment was lost. Climate Orbiter, as well as other subsequent missions were affected by it, but it was an orbiter that was sent. And unfortunately, by using different measurement systems, so this is where different teams are working together. There's development teams, operations teams, management teams that are not fully engaged in communicating and sharing information, and had limited training interactions and mechanisms in place to kind of prevent this from happening. The different teams were using, some were using the metric system, whereas others were using the good old English metrics or measurement system. And this caused the climate orbiter to be lost, unfortunately. So this was a good example, I think, of why it's really important to start to think about how these types of coordinating across different teams, even when we have the right people with the right knowledge, if there's not that kind of cross-team coordination, interaction, goals, understanding in place, we can have a lot of unfortunate failures. On the other hand, we can also see really great successes, like earlier this year that we saw with the rover that was made it to Mars and has been providing lots of great feedback and things to us on that. So we can learn from our past failures and challenges and hopefully improve. And that's really what a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be thinking about how do we move from a team level to a multi-team level. And it's especially important because more of our funding agencies, more and more in research, and really even just to tackle the big complex issues and challenges in society today, really require not just a single team to accomplish goals, but really these different complex teams of teams or multi-team systems that operate together. And so what do I mean by this? What does it look like to be in a multi-team system? So this is really just the basic definition of multi-team system here, which is that you have an interdependent group of 2 or more distinct component teams. And so what I mean by this is you might have a team of, I work right now, for example, on a team where we have folks from agriculture, we have folks from, we have a team from psychology, we have a team from economics who are also supporting that project. And all of us are bringing our strengths, our information, our skills to this, but we each have our own set of sub goals that we're responsible for, as well as this overarching purpose. We have a research project we're working on together. So we have a shared superordinate goal. So multiple teams working together for to try and address some superordinate, bigger, overarching goal. And this could be something like sending rover to Mars. It could be something like trying to create a new medication, a vaccine. All of these things are things that are going to be require these multiple areas of expertise to come together and work effectively. One of the defining components of these types of multi-team systems are that they have both team level and system level goals. And so we can kind of think about this as a hierarchy of goals. And this actually being something that can be really helpful and effective when we think about these big problems, big challenges. You know, if we think about trying to, for example, tackle something complex like dealing with healthcare provider burnout. That's something that we're looking at right now. And we have multiple teams of emergency medicine and organizational researchers working together to try and address burnout in an organization, healthcare organization. So we have both some more short-term, more proximal goals to be able to achieve monthly surveys, get some initial interventions going in that example. But we also have this higher level overarching goal, the overarching goal being to reduce burnout across the organization or across the department. And so it's a more distal, it's kind of this broader goal that if you think about it at this higher level, it can be very challenging just to think about how you even address this. But by breaking it down into smaller, more manageable pieces that can be handled by different teams, utilize and kind of play with the strengths of different teams, we can really start to tackle these bigger problems, these bigger challenges and issues in the longer run. So I've started with talking a bit about the complexities of working in multi-team systems, so I don't want you to think that these are something that only have problems and disadvantages. There are actually numerous advantages and benefits to working in these types of multi-team system structures, and to really even thinking, just moving our thinking from I'm working in a team to I'm working as a part of a multi-team system. I think that's something I really want to kind of highlight to everyone today is that, as I said before, many of you are probably working actually in multi-team systems, not just in a team. And there are different implications for that. So one aspect is that we can bring, as I mentioned before, you have the advantages of bringing together these different areas of specialization. In a single team, we may have one expert who is the representative from a certain department or area of expertise. In a multi-team system, you're bringing together these different teams that can all bring not just one person's expertise, but multiple areas of expertise. And this can really help to meet different needs, provide that divide and conquer type approach to create new knowledge, new converging ideas, new approaches than we might be able to do with just a single team alone. Additionally, when we talk about these types of multi-team systems working together, there's the potential for bringing together a lot more, many more resources. So both different organizational resources, bringing together different types of funding or connections or other external resources that may be helpful and beneficial. So again, it's increasing the amount of resources and information, funding, whatever it is that may help support the team overall. Additionally, by having these larger systems working together, there's the potential to really make the most of the knowledge, strengths, abilities, everything that the system is bringing to tackle a certain goal. And part of this is that, one thing that can happen here is that we can more easily adjust and be flexible. So if a new challenge or a new issue comes up, maybe time one is where how folks were contributing and connecting across different teams to start with, perhaps some new challenge or new issue that was not anticipated comes up, and the system can restructure who is communicating with whom, how they're coordinating. Even if something happens like losing one team member. So if we're losing a member from the civil engineering group in this example, then we won't lose all of our knowledge and expertise just by losing that one person. We still have that overarching core group that can help support from that end. And it also allows for bringing, for each of these different component teams to really bring in their own strengths and additional resources, maybe in the face of a difficult situation or some type of challenge. So overall, there's a lot more kind of flexibility, ability to respond, adapt, think more creatively, and address situations differently when working in these types of multi-team systems as opposed to working in just a team. However, of course, as I said before, there are definitely some challenges, and this is really where we want to start to think about and start to move towards some of the recommendations. And so the things that are set up here, you'll follow. I'm going to be following this with some of the examples of different recommendations that we can hopefully use to address and tackle some of these issues. So one major challenge is that, as I said, multi-team systems themselves are complex. But they're tackling these complex issues and difficult challenges that our society is being faced with. But at the same time, they are also experiencing more complex coordinating and communication and relationship management demands themselves. So when you have more people, then you have more potential to either have people, everyone trying to share all the information at the same time, or trying to direct each other on how to do something, or not always being clear who's taking over on a certain responsibility. So on one hand, you might have too little direct coordination. So there may be more of this assumption that, okay, well, we each know what we're supposed to be doing and we're all doing that, right? That's, everybody's, kind of working on their own in these teams. And we may even get so focused on what we're doing as a team that we forget to reach across the different team boundaries to ensure that there's effective coordination. And that's where we can potentially miss out on certain aspects of a project or an effort that are needed to achieve that overarching goal. So we may forget that something is really important that needs to be done because we're assuming that one of the other teams is taking care of it, or it's just fallen off the radar because it's not an immediately related to one of our proximal goals. So in this case, we may have too little direct coordination, which is going to lead to insufficient collaboration. But on the other hand, there may be too much direct coordination, which is also inefficient in terms of the collaboration. So in that case, we may there may be systems that go from we're not communicating enough and reaching across boundaries enough. Something happens, and now now everybody's trying to talk to everybody all the time. So you kind of can potentially go from one extreme to the other, and that can create a lot of challenging situations. An additional challenge that we have seen come up in these types of multi-team systems is the fact I've talked a lot about kind of how multi-team systems include members from different areas of expertise. You may have different teams that are kind of making up those areas of expertise, and which is fantastic for bringing in lots of new knowledge and information. However, it's challenging because these types of these differences, these degrees of difference between these component teams may actually end up reinforcing and more strongly kind of creating boundaries between those teams at the same time. So they actually prevent some collaborative relationships that could be happening. An example of this is I do, as I mentioned before, do a lot of work with healthcare, and you can see this in different professions sometimes where you may see different teams that are formed essentially kind of based around some of those professional roles. And if there is kind of not intermixing of folks on the teams, then those professional roles can really serve as boundaries and prevent the teams from working together effectively. This can kind of also lead to the issues around different attitudes or perceptions of what we think might be happening in a different group. And again, this type of differentiation can then, if we are not coordinating, communicating effectively, not reaching across those boundaries, and kind of staying in our own teams, then it detracts from the overall purpose of having these multi-team systems in the first place. And so this is one particularly challenging issue that I'll have a few recommendations for in just a bit. Another issue that that we have seen come up is that, and kind of ties in with what I was just talking about, is this idea that what is good for the team isn't always good for the system, and this goes both ways, so vice versa as well. So for example, kind of that what I was just talking about before. So if your multi-team system is made up of physicians and nurses and organizational researchers, that's something that we have right now. If each team is kind of separated and kind of identifies in those different groups, then we may have very, very strong and well-established teams, you know, the nursing team, the physician team, the researcher team, may all have these great interactions themselves, and they may be working together effectively internally in their own teams with very strong identities, but then it's easier to lose sight of this broader commitment to the bigger goal, to the overarching multi-team system. The other side of this is that if we too strongly enforce the overarching systems identity and say, you know, really emphasizing that you're part of this system, then it can get us to think a little bit more of the, okay, well, we're all part of this one team. I don't need to be uniquely contributing. I don't have as much to bring in as maybe someone else does or other people do. And so it actually can increase, we've seen increased social loafing and kind of stifle some of the creativity that is so important in these types of systems. Another challenge that we have seen here in multi-team systems are what we call these mixed motives when it comes to goals. So I talked before about how we have these different layers of goals and that you can kind of break up these huge, you know, major goals that are trying to be accomplished by a system and kind of create these more proximal goals that are a little bit easier to manage. However, there are situations where the proximal goals may be either tangentially related, so they're not as closely tied, or even in conflict with the overarching goal or with the goals of other teams. And so what I mean by this is, so for example, you can see over here, here's a cancer care multi-team system in terms of an example of teams that may be working towards the overarching goal of providing optimal patient care for a patient with cancer. Now, the primary care team may be providing that day-to-day care, patient care, so composed of maybe the physicians and folks that, you know, interact with this patient on a regular basis, a daily basis, even sometimes. And there may be a need to bring a palliative care team into this system to help provide support, and as well as the oncology team. So each of these, you can see each team kind of has this sub goal that they're focused on. So day-to-day patient care versus focusing on the clinical condition versus focusing on kind of relieving the symptoms. All of those contribute to optimal care for the patient, but depending on you know, how they're perceiving each other, how they're perceiving the goals of one another, there can be emerging conflict, emerging competition that may come up. So, for example, if oncology team members are viewing, you know, bringing in palliative care as giving up or not maybe providing, you know, not trying to cure the patient, then that can create a challenge for trying to reach that optimal care. And that optimal care may not always be a cure. It may not be reaching remission for all patients. And so that is something that creates some potential tension and issues for achieving that optimal goal. Some of these can also come up in research teams and scientific teams and our regular teams, but it's much more of an issue in a multi-team system because of the size, the potential for kind of having different perceptions, having increased, you know, opportunities for kind of more of this in-group, out-group type feeling. So this isn't to say that these aren't challenging team level, but they are exacerbated at the system level. So this is something I just want to have to say, speak up or anything at this point in time, but just think a little bit about, when you've worked in your own teams, when you've worked in your own research teams, or maybe now you're thinking about it more as this multi-team system approach. What types of mixed motive situations have you maybe experienced, and then what types of conflicts might that have created? You're certainly welcome to share those in the chat if you'd like, but just wanted to give you a chance to kind of think a little bit about this, because I think this is a really important issue that we probably all of you have experienced at some point in time in this type of setting. So the last challenge I want to mention before getting into the recommendation side of things is to think some about and have you think a little bit about these dynamic work contexts. So it's the ability of the multi-team system itself to be able to change and adapt and be flexible is really one of the advantages, because you've got so many different kind of teams and players that can contribute. But the challenge of this is that when these multi-team systems are working to tackle these complex challenges, they're put into these dynamic contexts where things might change a lot. So we may have some new information that comes out. We may have a new, for example, with working on a vaccine, there may be new strains that come out, and there's a new or new side effects or new things that may need to be addressed, that the multi-team system, in theory, is well equipped to adjust to and adapt to. But sometimes we tend to go to what we know. When we are in these highly, as humans, as people, we tend to look towards those who are similar to us as opposed to those that are different. So when things are very dynamic and very uncertain, we want to go with what's comfortable. So we will look more towards our own team members, so the component team that we're part of, as opposed to maybe reaching out as much as we should be and coordinating, communicating across those boundaries as much as we should be. So this is just something to kind of keep in mind, and as I said before, even maybe just a little self-reflecting on situations where you may have experienced this in your own teamwork environments. So how do we address all these challenges? There's, as I said, lots of different issues that come up. We really want to think about how do we play to the strengths of what we can get out of working in a multi-team system, and think about some of the ways that hopefully are manageable, not difficult things to implement in your own teams today. So why do we care? Why do we want to think about these and offer these types of recommendations? Well, one of the problems is that when we think about these scientific teams, unfortunately, they often underperform. And this especially happens when these teams or multi-team systems have different disciplines, when they lack a core discipline, or when the team is very large. So everything I just explained before about multi-team systems pretty much comes out here in the research and what we've seen in the past, even at the team level. So the larger it is, the more there's diversity in disciplines, and when there's not a strong core discipline featured, then we can see it. Unfortunately, we're not always able to achieve those higher order goals. However, so as we kind of think about this and this overarching challenge of trying to balance the different, all these different factors, especially thinking about the balancing of component team performance, and so teams operating the system, and then that overarching performance, that overarching goal, there are some potential interventions. There are things that can be done. There are things that we can start to look towards, a lot of which tends to focus around things like building upon what we know about good team training, but also incorporating some between team training, not just at the team level, but thinking about how do we incorporate into more of those typical team training programs, the multi-team systems, factors and features and things to kind of keep on your radar. We also can think about the way in which the work is designed and how we're coordinating, communicating, and if we're kind of tackling or kind of implementing the right types of coordination and interactions that are going to help us reach a more system level goal. And also think about especially the role of leadership. In multi-team systems, this is one area that is especially important. Leaders are important in teams, but they are also that much more important in ensuring effective multi-team system performance. And so there's a few recommendations I have here that are focused specifically on those leadership opportunities. So the first thing that is really important and important to think about when it comes to working effectively in these multi-team system structures is thinking about what are the patterns of interactions. So there could be a lot of potential interactions, a lot of people who could be coordinating and talking with one another. But if you have every single person on a multi-team system trying to communicate and coordinate, as we talked about before, it will essentially just create kind of a chaotic, ineffective environment. Everybody's trying to tell everybody else what to do, not going to work well. So one of the first steps, or one really something that can be done at any point in time in a multi-team system, is to think about what are the interaction demands. So who are the members and the component teams that need to be working together? What are the different tasks that we have? Checking in to remind ourselves, what are those goals that we have? What are our proximal goals? What are our distal goals? How are we prioritizing things? Which of the different team members and across these different groups actually need to be interacting? And then how do these patterns potentially change over time? And so what might happen in some of these types of settings is that you may see when you start to think about the interaction of your team is that you see a lot of what's happening there at maybe at the bottom. So if you look at that bottom figure where the leadership team is kind of reaching out to the different teams, but then and certain teams are kind of coordinating together. So think of the lines as the coordination that might actually be or might be perceived as what we need to do. So it's saying here really we need to have these. We think that these different teams need to be talking to each other. So team 5 needs to be talking to team 2, but they don't need to be interacting with team 6 at all, for example. That may be what we think good communication might be looking like, or it may be what our actual coordination is looking like. But if we sit down and map out these tasks and think about kind of the goals and the contributions of each different team, what the actual needed pattern of inter-team collaboration might look like might be more of like that top figure. So where you see that different, pretty much all the teams are coordinating with each other to some degree. You've got a lot more interconnections among your teams because there may actually be a lot more highly interdependent tasks than you see at the initial start of things. So this is really just kind of what we call a task analysis or a coordination analysis. It sounds probably a little bit more complex than it actually is, but it's really just thinking about mapping out and doing this periodically so that it's not just a one-time thing. Thinking about that we want to be able to understand both what is actually happening, so who is in reality actually talking to whom and coordinating with whom and who's working on things together versus maybe what we actually need to be doing. So maybe it's that we're missing on some of those important connections because what is actually happening isn't what is truly necessary for successful performance. And there are different tools that can help with this, but one of the ones that I like to really emphasize the most, because they're both useful for teams and multi-team systems, are teaming charters or team charters or multi-team system charters, whatever you want to call them. Essentially, it's documenting the things I just described. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? What are our goals? Who's on our teams? And what are the different roles, responsibilities, tasks, and what are the, we'll talk a bit later about the performance aspects, but how do we know that, that we are performing well? How do we know that, that what we're doing is, or how are we going to recognize that and reward that performance? not just at a system level, but also for teams, individuals. What are we going to do whenever folks are maybe not working as the way they should or contributing the way they should? And these types of team charters, it's like I said, it's literally documenting, writing out kind of a contract or a charter, a chart that will provide some documentation. Also, these can serve as living documents, which is something that I think is important to note too, is that this isn't okay, we wrote down what it is that what we're going to be doing is this multi-team system, and we've got our goals, we've got our tasks, and we're done. It's that we want to update that because, for example, you may have new members coming in, you may have entirely new teams coming in, and being able to document and provide also this documentation to those new members can really help to get everyone on the same page quickly. It can be helpful to clarify and make sure that that we understand at the end of this project, at the end of this effort, what everyone is expecting to get out of it, what we think we're all going to be able to contribute, and what are our contingency plans for when things don't go the way that we think they will, because that's always what is happening. And we've got some great evidence that whenever teams work and utilize these team charters, that they can really help to enhance overall performance. So even if you have kind of the right people with good plans in place, team charters will help them be that much more effective. And also, importantly, whenever we have teams that maybe aren't working as well, and multi-team systems that maybe aren't working as well, don't have maybe everything quite in place to start with, the charters can really help you get up to speed and really help you get kind of work through some of those challenges and catch up to the to other teams. So there are lots of great resources out there on team charters and teaming charters in general. Happy to provide some additional follow-up on that if anyone is interested. Some other recommendations. So something else to think about too is that there are lots of great team training programs out there. Many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Team Steps. And those are wonderful programs for supporting the team level communication, coordination, backup behaviors, all of those, trust, all of those things. Yes, I'll absolutely provide a template for that. But these types of team training programs are only now starting to incorporate the multi-team aspects. So they don't address those, they address the issues of how do we work together within our team, but they don't tackle the between unit or between team factors. So how do we coordinate and communicate more effectively across our teams? And even just, like I said, kind of noting that there is a difference between working in a team and teaming with others across these different group boundaries, different component team boundaries. And so since there are so many potential issues that can come up kind of around this, these working across teams, then utilizing some different types of team training and kind of starting to programs, like I said, like Team Steps, are starting to incorporate modules on multi-team systems to further kind of expand on, especially the communication and coordination across teams aspect. But thinking of providing things such as framework reference training, cross training is something that is especially useful, I think, for multi-team systems. This isn't about understanding every single thing that the other team is doing, that every single person is doing. It is getting a sense of, at a high level, what is the, what are the expectations, what are the skill sets, what are the knowledge contributions that different teams are fulfilling in the system, so that you can get a better sense of what they're doing, and then maybe also when to go to them for certain project needs, research, whatever it is that you're working on, being able to kind of span those boundaries and work together. And then also kind of going back to that, as I was just talking about with the team charters, or with the that type of documentation of those patterns of interactions, the more that we are aware of the need for kind of, and the fact that different communication patterns will exist, that is another important part of this, is to think about the communication that's happening, not just within the individual teams, but across those teams as well. So trainings that already tap into this from a team training perspective, but expanding those to incorporate and think about and reflect on the system level as well is really, really helpful. And as I said, there are some out there that are starting to do that already. So this third recommendation actually has a couple different components to it in terms of ways that we can tackle it. So one thing that, as I said before, these different working across boundaries and you kind of really thinking about the different boundary and different forces that may be happening in a multi-team system or happening to the multi-team system, where our systems are going to, you know, our natural tendencies of going to the people we know as opposed to branching out to other teams might be coming into play, and the need for more kind of reaching across those boundaries in general, as opposed to kind of staying in our comfort zones, is really important. And so one thing that we want to do here is really kind of just being aware and thinking about and proactively trying to manage this boundary enhancing and countervailing forces would be one way that that we can start to hopefully kind of smooth out and make multi-system functioning a little bit more effective. One way to do this is just to, you know, create direct one-on-one relationships and providing opportunities to connect directly. So so this is more about kind of some of the interpersonal aspects. So I said before, you know, you don't want your multi-team system, every single person always talking to everyone and trying to do all the task work that way. However, having key opportunities to facilitate shared information, sharing tasks is a particularly beneficial component to try and kind of reduce those boundaries feelings and kind of, you know, overcoming that tendency to want to just go work with who we know. So this could be, for example, if you were working on a research project and there are grad students on this project, then providing them with shared tasks or providing, you know, maybe opportunities to present and provide updates on information and kind of what's going on, having some different you know, socializing opportunities in different settings where there's a chance to just to get to know each other a little bit, and especially to focus on kind of direct relationships that would where there are maybe some cross-boundary mentoring. That's something that we have seen be very successful in different research teams, is that having, for example, grad students and more junior team members be mentored by someone across the across team boundaries. So I have students who are working with faculty in engineering, and having an engineer mentor is one thing that that is beneficial for my student as a psychology grad student, to be able to help understand a little bit more about what it is that is going on, kind of what each contributes to the overarching project. There's also the potential to kind of reduce these boundaries by really just kind of reinforcing and reminding those subordinate goals. And this is where things like checking out the team charters can be helpful, just kind of in meetings, in joint sessions, kind of the reminders of what it is that we are working towards, what's our bigger overarching picture, especially important for leaders to kind of take charge of this and bring it back up, because they can kind of really help set that direction. Additionally, and kind of final piece of this in terms of thinking about how to kind of work across those boundaries and kind of counteract some of the those negative forces on MTSs, is to be very clear in establishing kind of those identities and communicating about the unique and important contributions for each team, not forcing kind of that overarching shared identity across the system, but having, you know, regular opportunities to highlight the strengths and the contributions of each group. So one opportunity to do this is during meetings and having some clear meeting structures, norms, ways to facilitate discussions, conversations, and leaders in the setting, for example, playing the role of kind of really bringing in and incorporating and making sure that different groups and teams are contributing, making sure that there's introductions even in meetings sometimes, because sometimes we've been working on a team or as a system for a long time. There are new folks who come in, they may not get the same level of acknowledgement as others, and that's an important part to ensure that everybody kind of remains on that shared same page. Other leadership components, kind of tying in with that. Again, leaders are really active, need to be active in managing relationships in these multi-team systems, because they do have such a large impact on feelings, input, contributions. Leaders are going to be pivotal to kind of modeling the right tone, providing psychological safety, kind of supporting and ensuring that folks feel motivated. They have and really kind of helping manage things like conflict and that type of thing within the system, which can be that much more complex in these types of larger team environments. So one example, as I just mentioned, psychological safety is a really important component here. I think especially for these larger systems where, and this is where kind of tying back to that Mars Climate Orbiter example I provided earlier, one of the reasons that that happened and that it was not caught sooner is that, well, actually it was caught sooner. The discrepancies in measurement were caught by some of the lower level team members, lower level system members, kind of working at the front line. But when they tried to bring it up with their leadership, they were essentially told, that's a waste of time. I'm sure that they've done it correctly. Yeah, I'm sure that they're experts. They've got to have, they must be using the right measurement information. You're the one who's wrong. And so kind of doing everything that that goes against what would create a good psychologically safe environment. And so as you can see, those types of leadership, that leadership role is particularly important to really try and create that environment of, okay, can I speak up? Can I point things out whenever they're not going quite right? Can I kind of feel safe about taking risks and providing I think that maybe this happened, or maybe more importantly, I think I made a mistake. That can be especially critical in these types of larger systems where there may be kind of this spiraling effect of one mistake or one error can influence and impact all of the different teams in the system. Another recommendation, we've got a couple more here. I want to make sure I leave a couple minutes here at the end to provide opportunity for questions. But recommendation 6 really kind of focuses on also tying in with that type of those leader responsibilities and providing opportunities to give feedback and speak up and everything, is that we really want to make sure that that multi-team systems are leveraging team and system level feedback to reinforce positive climates, supportive climates, but also learning. So one thing that, and actually this ties into one of the earlier questions about charters. Another great set of resources has been created by, there's a professor, Tom O'Neill at the University of Calgary, who has created a set of tools at ITP Metrics. If you go to itpmetrics.com. There's some great team level assessment. A lot of that could be easily adapted and implemented at the multi-team systems level. But the thing here is to really think about, okay, how are we going to, as we're working together, there's tendency in teams and multi-team systems to not make the most of opportunities to leverage feedback. So instead of, when we have, maybe we haven't reached our big overarching distal goal, but we've reached, maybe a proximal goal. And we've reached a milestone in our project. We've submitted a grant proposal. And that is a great time to bring members of the multi-team system together to provide some feedback and really think through not just the team aspects, but also the the system level, kind of check-in, status check, feedback opportunities there. Are we coordinating effectively across those boundaries? Are we doing the things that we said that we were going to do in that team charter? Utilizing tools like this type of kind of performance assessments to regularly check in and give feedback to the members of the system, to the component teams in the system. So if a certain component team is doing an outstanding job, or maybe needs to maybe not quite meeting those expectations, then providing feedback not just to the system as a whole, but maybe to that specific team in particular. One way to do this, and you may have heard about this in some of the other talks in the past, is the benefits of debriefing as a way to really encourage, leverage up milestone performances to do this type of check-in, a debrief, see how things are going, and really use that as a chance to give feedback. From a multi-team system perspective, this is, again, kind of making sure that we're not just talking about what we're doing in our individual teams, but how we're all contributing together overall. Last recommendation is to kind of also tied to that is again, ensuring that there's acknowledgement and rewards for team and multi-team system performance. So again, it can be easy to either kind of get caught up in the proximal or those distal goals, but we want to make sure there's a balanced set of rewards, incentives, policies, procedures that are recognizing all of those goals together. So this is also something that needs to be updated if our goals are changing. If our reward system is structured in a particular way, and some of our goals are changing, we want to adapt that accordingly. So for example, and this may be something you can all kind of think about individually yourselves. So if you were part of a research team, and especially interdisciplinary multi-team systems are very big on leveraging those different contributions across disciplines, then how are we going to make sure that the publications and the output of our scientific research is being sent to or published in outlets that are going to be rewarding for not just one discipline or one set of researchers on our team, but how are we going to kind of either target maybe a range of different journals? How are we going to divide up some of the work so that there are strengths and so there are kind of rewards, benefits, outcomes for all of our component teams that are going to be of equal weight with their contributions. And this can get a little bit tricky, a little bit messy, especially from that interdisciplinary perspective. Different types of reward systems and different types of organizations, university structures, and everything. So the more that this can be kind of reflected on, adjusted, clarified, and continually updated, not just set out at one point in time and decided upon and then done. This is going to really help improve overarching performance for the system. And finally, I think one of the key things you're probably already picking up on here is that each of our, when we're working in multi-team systems, this isn't about just having one intervention doing one thing to make this system magically work effectively. It's about tying in multiple team and multi-team systems interventions. So for example, here you can see we have different cycles of, let's say there's 3 teams working together. I mentioned the burnout example earlier. We've got maybe 3 groups of folks or 3 teams in our overarching system trying to tackle that issue. These teams may be each kind of working on different interventions, kind of implementing maybe their own internal team charters or things like that, doing their own performance evaluations or providing feedback, doing their own internal debriefs. And that may be all well and good, but we may also need to have these overarching multi-team systems. Maybe in this case, it's that they're in these, the purple, the MDIs, that those are multi-team system interventions. They're being provided maybe a debrief at that group level. So we may do a team debrief, but early on, but maybe if the performance didn't go as well, or maybe if there's this is just a particular task where it's a great chance to provide feedback to everyone, then thinking about how to kind of intertwine those and and also that there may be different different team needs that may require more or less interventions earlier on or later on in the performance cycles. But thinking about how to integrate those together is really important. So it doesn't mean that we all have to be doing interventions all the time, but there are a lot of really good strategies out there that can really set things in the right direction. So having those teaming charters, having opportunities to debrief as a system, utilizing different performance mechanisms or different performance feedback mechanisms to ensure there's input there is all really important as well. And so that was my last slide. So I just want to kind of leave you with that final thought that yes, these things are complex, but yes, there are also a lot of different tools and resources and great things out there to hopefully help support. And I would love to talk further with anyone who has any questions. I know that I have not given us much time here for discussing, so 1 minute, I think, but we'd be happy to follow up with anyone who wants to either email me or talk separately afterwards.